Good evening. Welcome to the League of Women Voters NAMI meeting on housing and the dilemma of adult mental health children with adult mental health who need housing, and what happens when the parents aren't there to help support them, or some people don't have parents supporting them in the first place. So tonight, it's my pleasure to represent both organizations. I'm active in both. The League of Women Voters has a comprehensive and thorough position supporting a better mental health system that they studied and did in the 1980s, and fortunately or unfortunately, it's still timely and relevant. The NAMI, of course, has long supported, and that's the main goal of supporting people with mental illnesses, and we strongly support housing as well. So tonight, that's what we're going to focus on, is housing. And it's my pleasure to introduce the moderator, Representative Alice Hausman, who will then introduce our speakers. And we have quite a panel, so you will see. So, Alice was the bonding committee chair, the first one who ever started funding affordable housing through the bonding committee. And she worked with Homes for All, the housing groups, and worked miracles there. Then she went on to chair a committee that focused solely on housing, and she had a hearing that was devoted totally to people with mental illnesses and the housing that they need. So we have lots to thank her for. She's also a veteran legislator, so she will put our panelists through their paces with making sure we get good answers and no beating around the bush. So with that, Representative Alice Hausman.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you to the many sponsoring League of Women Voters chapters and the NAMI affiliates for putting together this important program tonight. In addition to the people who are here in the room, I'm told we have over 60 people who are joining in remotely. Is that the number? Yes. Yeah, so over 60 people in addition to those in the room, for the sake of the speakers, so that you know there's another audience listening as well. By way of introduction, for myself, I'd like to tell two brief stories about how I was introduced to this topic. When you're a legislator, advocacy groups invite you to come for evenings of education. And I was fortunate to have a couple of those opportunities. One was sitting in a living room, I think it might have been in Roseville, where we were joined by adults with serious mental illness. And we went around the room and they all told their stories. And one person told a positive story, that his life was stable for a long period of time. And he credited that with the fact that his housing was stable and safe during all of that time. Everyone else around the room, as they told their stories, had a different story to tell. The complications and challenges of their life, and they too linked it to the fact that they didn't have that safe place. Nothing else in life goes well if you don't have a safe place to sleep at night. And that was the story, that's what I learned from them. And then I think the other evening, I believe, was in Mindy's living room, and there we were joined by parents of adults with serious mental illness. And they talked about the role they played and supportive roles, and they all had the same question: what happens when we're gone? What is the model that works? What takes place of the kinds of supportive roles they've had? What happens when we're gone? And so those were the two lessons I learned from individuals and family members during those two evenings in living rooms. Well, we have the right people in the room tonight to have a fruitful discussion of the housing dilemma facing adults with serious mental illness, including what happens after parents are gone. Through this panel, we are looking to gain a better understanding of current and future housing options that match the needs of individuals with serious mental illness and their families or caregivers. Now, there are certainly many other issues that we could talk about. This evening, we are focusing on housing. And as you write your questions, we'll just keep stressing that issue. Again, I'm hoping that all of you here in person have received a card to write questions on. There will be volunteers who will collect them. Maybe just hold them up if you have a question that's ready to be asked. We are going to have 3 presenters, and when they conclude, then we hope we have gathered your questions, and we'll have a Q&A at the conclusion. Those present virtually, by the way, can put questions in the chat. We have, again, some volunteers here who are monitoring the chat, and they'll pass those questions on to us as well. So, what are the currently available housing options? In April, a focus group of NAMI and League of Women Voters families and family members with serious mental illnesses compiled a list of their ideas of housing models that meet their personal needs. I'm going to give just a very brief summary. There's a huge amount of information we could share from what they did, but just a brief summary. The common themes in the preferred homes are appropriate support, which for people with serious mental illness is often considerable and more than is provided in most apartment living. A small number of occupants, personal bedroom, common kitchen and living areas, staff available as needed, especially for med management, and daily human contact. Families, when present, provide a considerable amount of this support, and a common worry is what will happen to loved ones when they no longer can. And so to the introduction of panelists. The first panelist, Commissioner Ho, I had the privilege of working with her in my last few years and learned so much during that period of time. And what it tells me is the challenges are great, and it requires an evening like this to draw out the particular challenges in this area. So Housing Commissioner Jennifer Ho has a long history of working to fight homelessness in America. From 2013 to 2017, she was the Senior Advisor for Housing and Services at the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. From 1999 to 2010, Jennifer was the first executive director of a nonprofit organization called Hearth Connection, which managed a nationally recognized demonstration project on long-term homelessness for single adults, youth, and families in Minnesota. Born and raised in Minnesota, which she still calls home, Jennifer received a bachelor's degree in philosophy from Bryn Mawr College. Eric Grumdahl, our second panelist, who graduated from the University of Minnesota in 1994 with a double major in philosophy and women's studies, has joined in August of 2022, I believe, the Minnesota Department of Human Services as Assistant Commissioner. And in his role as Assistant Commissioner, Mr. Grumdahl oversees programs and policies that serve people who lack stable housing and have mental health or substance abuse disorder diagnoses. In his previous state roles, Mr. Grumdahl established Homework Starts with Home, which I had the good fortune to be able to fund in my budget committee, and it just impressed me so much. You know, when you hear these programs for the first time, Homework Starts with Home, you begin to see the connections that we're going to. An interagency initiative focusing on ending homelessness for students and their families. How can you do homework if you don't have a home? Jill Wiedermann-West joined People Incorporated as its first chief operating officer in 2010. She was promoted to CEO in 2014. Before joining People Incorporated, she was a chief operating officer at the Hazelden Betty Ford Foundation. She holds a Master of Arts in Psychology and Human Behavior from the National University of San Diego and a Bachelor of Arts in Sociology and Social Work from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. But we get to celebrate her and congratulate her for another reason tonight. Congratulations to Jill for being honored by Minnesota 500 magazine, the Minnesota Monthly, as one of the state's 500 most powerful and influential leaders in 2022. We'll go to the presentations. Each presenter has up to 15 minutes. I heard from the first presenters that they might be a bit more brief than that, but we give them a little bit of flexibility in those presentations. And we'll go in this order: Jennifer, then Eric, then Jill, and then and again, generating the questions, and they'll monitor that up here. But Jennifer, please.
Well, thank you. And if I call her Madam Chair, it's because of a lot of training and a lot of habit. But it's nice to be here. I want to thank both NAMI and the League of Women Voters for paying attention to this important issue and putting this event on, and just acknowledge that we're here with two powerhouse women who have made an incredible mark on Minnesota politics and getting things done. It's a real pleasure to be here with Mindy and with Alice. And I want to tell you a little bit about how I came to be the Housing Commissioner, and then I want to tell you what it means to be the Housing Commissioner, so you have a kind of a sense of how I got to this chair and the chair that I sit in my role today. I studied philosophy, whatever. I read a good memo. But I worked in managed care for about 10 years. And it was really because when I came out of college and I wasn't certain what I was going to do, managed care was really growing rapidly. And I was kind of wandering and just landed inside of health plans on the East Coast after I got out of college, and health plans here in Minnesota when I came back home. So I like to say I've worked for them all before they were who they were in their last merger. But I worked predominantly in Medicaid and Medicare programs, so really working on health care for people who were poor, people who had disabilities, and people who were older. And I moved through a variety of different health plans in those roles. But one day, in November of 1996, I got invited to a meeting by a group of people that were looking at the health care challenges of people with the longest histories of homelessness, and were hypothesizing that if we could put people into stable housing, that we would actually have a wiser expenditure of healthcare dollars, we would get better healthcare outcomes, and we could stably house people who hadn't had stable housing propositions. So I always say to people, if you think meetings are boring, you might actually go to a meeting one day that completely changes the trajectory of your life. That meeting certainly changed mine. And that led to my becoming the executive director of Hearth Connection, where we sought to build a reliable service financing source. I'm going to look at Eric, because Eric and I worked there for a long time together. We sought to create a reliable source of service financing that could be paired with housing, so that people could have both the services that they need to be stably housed and that housing stability because their housing was paid for. And we worked with the Minnesota legislature, actually, and created a funding stream inside of the Department of Human Services to do this work. And then I worked with Minnesota Housing and with HUD. I'll give a nod to Tom, because he was at HUD at the time, to organize the human services and the housing resources to be able to package this up. And we also worked with People Inc. and other community mental health agencies to do the service provision. That was an extraordinary experience for me, because I kind of came in with intellectual curiosity. I came in from, being a managed care executive and kind of having enough humility, and I'll just say enough at that point in my life, having enough humility to appreciate that the managed care tools that we had were not designed at all for a person with schizophrenia, maybe a veteran with military trauma, somebody who had a co-occurring substance use disorder, who had lived on the streets for 10 years and had therefore had a bunch of chronic health conditions as a result of living on the streets. Like what I was doing down in Egan, what I was doing over in Minnetonka, was not prepared to do case management for people in those situations. So I came in with some intellectual curiosity. Well, could having the right service and housing intervention help people be stably housed who had had this much instability in their lives? And then if they were housed, would they stay there? And if they stayed there, would they do better? And thanks to Eric, actually, we were able to raise money to do a big evaluation around all that. And we found out that with the right supports and with housing that felt like housing to folks, that we actually got extraordinary outcomes for people in terms of just their ability to sit still and begin their own recovery journey. But we also got better outcomes for systems. Instead of spending money on cops and jails and prisons and a revolving door of emergency rooms, extended hospital stays, but not actually getting any healthier, we were spending money on doctors and medicine and just that kind of care that I always say, I hope my brothers would have provided for me if I had found myself in that same type of a situation. That conversation and being involved in that conversation for over 10 years, both in Minnesota but on the national policy front, is what got me connected to the national conversation around the role of supportive housing, housing plus supports, in being able to create housing stability. That's what was my ticket to Washington, D.C. for 7 years, and with 2 HUD secretaries, and then ultimately I met a congressman named Tim Walz, and I thought to myself, boy, if Tim Walz ever runs for governor, it might be fun to go work for him. But he was on the House Veterans Affairs Committee, and I was working with the First Lady and other federal agencies on ending veterans homelessness. So I had testified in front of his committee. I had met with him a couple times, and we flew back and forth on the same plane sometimes, too. So he used to call me his commuter buddy. I don't think he actually knew my name. But he does now. He does now. So that's how I came to have the opportunity to be the commissioner of the Minnesota Housing Finance Agency. So I'm a cabinet-level commissioner appointed by the governor. In my second term, I run the state's housing bank. And as you know, housing in America is predominantly a privately funded activity that has a little bit of a public assist in it. And some of that public assist comes from the tax code, mortgage interest deduction, low-income housing tax credits. Some of that assist comes from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, if you've heard of a Section 8 voucher or public housing. And some of that assist, we're lucky in Minnesota, comes from our state legislature. So we do work to help prevent and end homelessness. We finance the capital and operating side of permanent supportive housing. We finance other types of affordable housing aimed at lower income or lower, like entry-level workforce or seniors. So we fill in the rental market where the private rental market doesn't have rents set low enough to help people who are of modest incomes. And then we also work in the single-family homes world. So we help first-time homebuyers with homebuyer education. We help people who don't, as I say, have the bank of mom and dad to be able to afford a down payment, but they make enough money to be able to pay off a mortgage. So we help with down payment and closing cost assistance. We are an issuer of mortgages. We did over $1 billion in mortgages last year. And we also do home rehab. A lot of that's targeted at helping older people be able to deal with health and safety issues in the home that they own so that they can stay there. So we don't regulate like Minnesota's housing system. You know, some of my sister agencies have regulatory authority over everything that happens in their realm. We don't even really have a housing system, right? We have a private market system with a government assist, and the government assist is insufficient for the challenges that are ahead. I think one of the most important things that I want folks to know is that the line that we usually draw between the work that we do and the work that our friends over at the Department of Human Services do is that we do housing that is housing, not a licensed facility. Things that are licensed facilities aren't inside of our housing space. So in this conversation about what different settings are going to look like, I mean, I'm going to be asking myself the question, would that be a licensed setting or not a licensed setting? But we also are looking for lots of ways, because we know that people want to live in a home of their own, whether they are A young couple getting started, whether you're a person with a disability, whether you are aging, people prefer to live in a home of their own. But I think the conversation over the course of the last 20 years has largely centered around how do we get those home and community-based supports right that allow people to be able to stay in their home as opposed to having to leave your home to go into some type of a licensed setting, whether that's a nursing home or another type of setting. How do we get those home and community-based supports right? And the question that I've asked for the last 20-odd years of my career, and how do we get those right for people who really aren't well connected to any setting, people who have long histories of homelessness that are just used to being moved along and moved around and not helped. So I say all that just so you kind of understand the purview. It's also a really fun time to be the housing commissioner because this legislative session in 2023 was the biggest win for housing in the history of the state since the creation of the agency back in 1972. We got $1.3 billion invested into housing. Actually, $2.6 billion for housing stability writ large across 9, state agencies. But for me to get $1.3 billion from the legislature this year, a starting good year for me would have been $115 million in my base for a 2-year period, and maybe $100 million of bonding authority, and maybe $20 million of one-time money. So a good year for me would have been like $250 million, and I just got $1.3 billion. It is covering the whole continuum from homelessness, rental housing, production, preservation, single family, a broad range of housing needs. But I think that it's an important time to just be thinking about, how can we use that to increase and improve the housing stock, especially for Minnesotans who aren't going to be successful in the private market housing world the way that it exists today. So that's really what I wanted to do in terms of framing up my comments today. I'm used to being drilled by the chair, but that's what I brought really prepared.
And because you just raised the issue of the budget increase, it's probably premature to ask this question, but I'll throw it out there because it's going to be, as we watch the next stages of developing around this challenge that we're bringing tonight, is there flexibility in that amount of money to begin to look at a special need like this and shape a particular response? Is there evaluation of current models that has to be done? Does that amount of money give you some flexibility this year as you write your budget to look at a challenge like this and say, I think we can do X?
But I think the easy answer is going to go back to the thing that I will be probably a bit of a broken record on, is the thing you want to do something that's going to be a licensed setting, or is it something that's going to be considered housing in which people can get services? But the provision of services doesn't raise it to the level of being a licensed setting by the Department of Health or the Department of Human Services. So is it a home ownership or a rental opportunity? There's opportunities for roommates. We don't prohibit roommates. We don't tell people they can't live with other family members. We are really in the business of financing the housing, and we don't tell communities you can only finance housing that looks like this. A lot of what we do is we make the funding available. The legislature puts the kind of goalposts out in terms of what the purposes of the money is. But communities are the ones that really come to us and say, this is what we'd like to do. Again, we tend to target people who are lower moderate income. We have some programs that target specific vulnerable populations. But in terms of the investments that we make in affordable rental housing and making home ownership possible, we just the main question for us is it a home? We don't fund homeless shelters, but we fund housing that helps end people's homelessness. We don't fund group homes, but we fund homes that people live in who have a range of disabilities. Because you're coming into a home that usually just has an income guideline for whether or not you're eligible for it, we don't ask people to collect information on the diagnoses of the people that move into our houses unless there's a certain specific type of subsidy that's attached to usually a rental unit, that the criteria for the use of that subsidy has been described by the Congress or the legislature as being specifically for people with mental illness, or specifically for people more broadly with a disability, or specifically for people who are experiencing homelessness. But the bulk of what we do is just around low and moderate income renters and around homeownership.
And what I heard the commissioner say that encouraged me was she used the word continuum, and we've always said to solve the issues of housing and homelessness, we have to be willing to invest across the entire continuum of housing. I think I was encouraged when I heard that particular phrase. Eric, you're next up.
Well, thank you, and let me begin by just also thanking our hosts, the League and NAMI, for bringing us together. Mindy, when you called, I was so happy to be able to say yes and be here with you tonight. And Representative Hausman, it's just a treat to see you again and be able to be with you all this evening. So I came to DHS 13 months ago, and prior to that served in a variety of roles related to homelessness at a state level for the prior 8 years. And before that, also had a tour of duty out in Washington at a federal level, worked in the county government of Dakota County before that, and then spent kind of the formative part of my career really learning about the challenges of housing instability, really through that lens of the individuals that are facing some of the biggest challenges to attain housing stability during my 12 years with Hearth Connection. And when I think about my current role, so I have this title that has too many syllables in it, Assistant Commissioner for Behavioral Health, Housing, and Deaf and Hard of Hearing Services. And if you can roll that off your tongue, you're one of about 2 people. And what I would say about that is that it reflects a real intention on the part of the Department of Human Services leadership to recognize the linkages and the bridges that are needed to be able to address housing stability from the perspective of the behavioral health needs of individuals that might face some of the biggest challenges, but also to recognize that housing stability is essential to obtaining health of any kind. And so I'm joined by counterparts from across DHS's leadership team that are really together focused on the way that we've talked about it is the whole agency is the state's Medicaid agency. The Medicaid program is really administered by every part of DHS, not just the part of DHS that specifically has healthcare in its name. And so when I think about tonight's conversation and think about mental health as health, mental health care as health care, I think that so much of what roots us in the challenge that we face tonight, frankly, is not just stigma related to mental illness, but really discrimination, internalized discrimination and structural discrimination in the way that we think about mental illness and its relationship to health and to health care. And so part of our challenge then is to figure out, in the context of that reality, how do we fix the things that we can, Mindy, if you don't mind me using your title, and really move in the direction that not only takes us to parity, but takes us to an environment that is promoting mental health as part of our efforts to promote health. I also want you to know, and I might get a little choked up about this, I also want you to know that I'm showing up tonight not just as somebody with that long, ridiculous title, but also as a family member. These are issues that my own family is grappling with right now in real time in ways that I can relate to many of you who are trying to navigate a complicated system and figure out how to piece together the right kinds of support and make sure that you have the sustainability and continuity that's needed to provide reassurance going forward. And I know firsthand that it is easy to be confronted as a family member that hasn't spent your whole life living in a human service system, most likely, navigating alphabet soup of acronyms and programs and complexity that makes it very difficult to piece together what you're actually trying to do for your loved one, for the person that you're there to support and serve. And so I have 4 messages for you tonight. The first one is, and this is really directed at all of you who are family members and loved ones, this is hard. This is really hard work. You're not imagining that this is hard work. This is really hard work to figure out how to put together the right kind of support to be able to make sure that the person that you care about is able to have what they need going forward. It genuinely is difficult. It's the deep end of the pool. It is akin to all the challenges that any individual facing a chronic health condition faces, again, coupled with that structural discrimination and stigma that requires us to find a way to do even more. And so one of the most important things that I hope all of you who are supporting a loved one are able to do is to recognize, name for yourself, this is really hard, and it's hard because we are still in the process 60 years on from when the Community Mental Health Act proclaimed a new vision, a new future for what we would do in this country to support individuals with mental illness. We are still in the process of building a system that's adequate to meet those needs. Now, I have a lot of optimism and hope because of the fact that when I talk to my counterparts around the country, Minnesota already has things and has innovated in ways that are the envy of many other states. That can also be true, but it's important to just recognize that when it feels hard, it's because it is hard, and part of the job of being a supporter, being a loved one, being a caring caregiver is figuring out how you're also going to take care of yourself, how you're going to put your own mask on first, how you're going to make sure that you've reached out and connected with support. And so my second message is, I'm glad to say you're not alone. There is support available. This is not something that families or individuals have to navigate and grapple with by themselves. Our public systems tend to be focused on individuals who are low income, and either, are low income because that's the situation that they're in at the moment that whatever presenting condition arrives, or who end up in a situation where they're low income and perhaps there would have been ways to intervene before that trajectory played out, right? That's a lot of the public sector response, is to make sure that where there aren't other means, that there is a public response that's able to step in and join them. Now, because of how much complexity exists in that system, a lot of which is because of effective advocacy that over the years has said, here's a gap in our services that we need to fill. There's a new program then to fill that gap. Here's another gap. Here's another systems issue that we need to address. As that kind of all the sedimentary layers of public policy around mental health have developed in Minnesota, but around the country too, what we've ended up with is a very, very complicated system to navigate, which is not wildly dissimilar to the complexity of our healthcare system, except that we still see these structural manifestations of how stigma and discrimination haven't really achieved parity between what we do for mental health and what we do for physical or somatic health. And so we are simultaneously trying to build and strengthen a system that is operating in that environment, and that's just a piece of what we have to understand. I am happy to say that you are not alone in a couple of really important ways. Now, for those of you at home and for those in the room, I'm going to throw out some resources here that I hope are easy enough to hold on to, that you can reference them after tonight's session. We've tried at the state to make some portals that help you navigate all the different pathways into services. And the first one, and perhaps for tonight's conversation, the most important one that I'll mention, is called Housing Benefits 101, which we have simplified to HB, Housing Benefits 101.org. Housing Benefits 101, HB101.org. On that site is a tool to help you navigate all the range of services and supports that exist, either to help somebody who is facing housing instability be able to kind of resolve whatever that issue is, or to support individuals that are living in community and even residential options as part of that. That's a really critical tool. There are other tools that I want to make sure you are aware of tonight as well. There's a similar portal for disability benefits, conveniently enough, titled DB 101, Disability Benefits 101, db101.org. And similarly, that will help you navigate all of the different pathways that might apply to your specific situation. Because of the complexity of our behavioral health system and healthcare in this country, there is not a simple one-size-fits-all answer that works for everybody all the time. What those tools are really designed to do is to help you navigate to the resources that are going to be responsive to your particular situation and to the needs of the person that you're seeking to support. There's another resource that I want to call out as well, and that is disabilityhubmn.org. And that is also a resource that, again, can help you navigate, including navigating to tools that can help families do the very difficult but critical planning needed to think about that future state that you're trying to be prepared for. And so that takes me to the next key message that I have for you tonight, which is that if you are able, in your particular environment with your loved one, to do planning now, it is critical to do that planning now. I know in my own personal experience how difficult it is to have some of the conversations that are needed. But again, I want you to know you're not alone in needing to think through that process. And in fact, DHS and many other partners have invested a lot of effort into a framework for how families and other loved ones can think about a plan using a framework called person-centered planning. Person-centered planning is really the realization that for a long-term solution to work, it has to not only be responsive to the things that are important for somebody. They have to, have access to support when they need it, and food, and medicine, whatever else it might be, the things that are important for them, but also critically what is important to them. Because without the things that are important to someone, which can include, here are my social connections, here's the linkage that I have to my family, here's my pet that I really want to make sure is a part of my life going forward. Whatever those things are that an individual identifies as being important to them, if those are actually as central to the plan as the things that are important for somebody, the result of that plan is going to end up having a lot more power to actually provide the outcome that everybody is after. But they're going to look really different because the list of what's important to and important for each person is going to be different. And so I think about this in the context of housing. There isn't an ideal model of housing. There's a lot of answers about what the best housing option would be, and this person-centered planning framework is a tool to help you figure out in each particular circumstance what that looks like. You can find a whole bunch of tools, including some templates that you can literally print out and put to work in your own situation on DHS's website. So I'm giving you another website, I apologize. mn.gov/DHS, Department of Human Services. And on that site, just search in the search box for person-centered planning. The last message that I have for you tonight, there actually are a couple of other resources I wanted to call out. One of the things that's critical in doing that planning is also to really appreciate the fact that the landscape for both legal and financial issues for families and individuals to navigate is incredibly complicated. And again, if you're able, what we would recommend is that you enlist experts who can actually help with that planning. There is a whole specialization of law called elder law. It's perhaps imperfectly titled, but elder law that is really focused on helping people navigate the very complicated ins and outs of what's possible while maintaining eligibility for various programs and services and health care. And what we would recommend is, rather than trying to wing it or try to become that expert on your own, tapping an expert, if you're able, who can actually help navigate that landscape is a really critical step for the families that are able to do so. I also want to give a shout out to Volunteers of America Center for Excellence in Supported Decision Making. That's another great local resource that is incredibly helpful at helping families navigate difficult situations and the decision making around long-term planning. And finally, I would be remiss with NAMI as our host not to call out specifically some of the classes and resources and family-to-family connections that NAMI facilitates. So NAMIMN.org if you have not already visited that site. The last message that I have for you tonight is that all of you have chosen to take some of your evening and participate in this conversation. And that by itself means that you're in a small minority of individuals who would benefit from this kind of a conversation or who are in the midst of grappling with it in their own house, right? What I would ask is that you think about the way in which this can also be a moment of activation for you and really getting engaged in the kinds of policy change and advocacy that are needed to continue to improve Minnesota's mental health system and response for individuals facing mental health challenges. I'm really happy to be here and I can't wait for your questions. Thank you.
We have a lot of questions. Jill.
Well, then I'll take just a few minutes to introduce myself. I'm Jill Wiedermann-West. I'm the CEO of People Incorporated. People Incorporated is the provider side of what we were just talking about related to housing supports in the behavioral health area and some of those specialized supports for housing in the general population. I want to, of course, mirror the comments already made about the invite to tonight's, meeting. I can't tell you that I already feel that electricity of a very vibrant discussion. So I'm really very excited to be here. My career is as a clinician. And that is how I grew up. And I was a clinician until probably a year after I joined People Incorporated, which was really my first role in what I would say is the deep community level of service. We're a nonprofit. We are dealing with individuals that are quite a marginalized and vulnerable population, both by virtue of their disability in many cases, but also by virtue of the stigma that we heard talked about, and obviously also just in terms of socioeconomic strength. So when I came to People Incorporated, I was still a clinician, but I started to see myself in a little bit different way, and I started to see myself a little bit more as a healthcare champion, a leader, and an innovator. We just heard some really extraordinary comments about sort of the general housing situation in Minnesota, and really the multitude of things that we're doing really, really well in that area, and the acknowledgement that there are some things that we certainly want to lean into further. We just heard comments about, the behavioral health, the area of behavioral health and how that plays a role in housing. And again, all the really amazing resources that we have, the possible sources of opportunity we have to for a system already, but also to create and embellish that system. And that is the role of People Incorporated. Our role is, in fact, as that licensed facility, providing supportive services, which include housing. We do that in a couple of different ways. People Incorporated is a very broad reach. We do everything from homeless outreach to clinics for children and adults, to treatment programs, case management, a lot of community partnership in policing and a number of other areas. I won't get into all of the different things that People Incorporated does, but in the housing area, which is what we're here to talk about tonight, we really do supportive housing in a couple of areas. We do some specialized supportive housing for individuals with specifically more complex needs even than just mental health. So maybe mental health and physical health issues, or in the cases of our deaf and hard of hearing services, individuals living with mental illness, needing the supports, but also are deaf and or hard of hearing. The other thing that we do is we do a large number of folks in case management, and our case management services are specifically designed under the rules of the Department of Health to basically go into environments where individuals live in their own spaces, apartments, homes, whatever it might be, and continue to support them, whether it be resourcing, checking in on what other needs they might need, making sure that they're attending to different health care needs and or mental health needs, appointments that they have, really trying to support them. So we provide housing currently to about 141 individuals in Hennepin and Ramsey counties. This is in the form of just our physical residential placements. They are 4-bed supportive living environments, and they are larger, multiple supportive living environments in apartment complexes where there is 24/7 supports. Then we also have, I would say, somewhere in the vicinity of about 100 case managers from St. Louis County all the way down to Scott County that are really supporting individuals who live in the community independently without those 24/7 supports, but need additional supports to be coming on a regular basis. You know, we heard, the comments that it's a confusing system, it's a hard system. It is, and it's hard to find these resources. It's hard to locate the right fit for individuals in a housing support system. And of course, we have a number of individuals that we know haven't gotten there yet. We see individuals that are unhoused in a lot of different ways. We see individuals that are unhoused because they are homeless. They might be families or they might be individuals. And we specifically work with that community that is struggling with mental health related issues. We also see individuals who we would say are not securely housed, meaning they don't have a lot of the supports that they need if they do get housing to keep that housing successfully. Or they are what we call couch hopping or family moving, meaning they're kind of living with whoever they can at the moment, but it is not safe and secure housing. It's not the kind of housing that you heard Representative Hausman or Commissioner Ho talking about that actually promotes healing, that promotes the ability to really stand up an enhanced life while you're living with a mental health diagnosis. So we want to be looking for those opportunities to help those individuals that aren't securely housed or are not keeping their housing to also be supporting them in different ways. And that takes a lot of innovation. It takes a lot of creativity to think about how do I help each one of these individual folks make sure that now the place that we've got them housing now, that they're really successful here, and that the first time they're not having a good day, it doesn't spill out in a way that makes them less eligible for housing there or anywhere else. That is a very real concern because, as we know, people that have mental health conditions don't have a good day every day. And sometimes when they're not having a good day, it can come off in a way that can pull a lot of different folks in with it. So we really have to look at ways to innovate around that. I think we have to look at ways to innovate what was really, Representative Hausman talked about the continuum. I talk about it the same way, but I think about it as a system of care. At People Incorporated, we're very aware of wanting to integrate in our system, to acknowledge that individuals that are in our system, regardless of what service they're getting, they are likely to need other services to support them, either outside of People Incorporated or inside our organization. Or maybe they don't now, but at some point later on, they may find themselves needing those different services. It is essential that we have discussions like we're having today, because creating that continuum or that system of care is so vital, because this is a problem we can't solve discreetly. It's not Commissioner Ho's problem or Assistant Commissioner Grumdahl's problem. It's not my problem. It's all of our problems, because we're a community, and well communities require us to surround our communities with the resources that help to stimulate and sustain wellness. And these are big, big issues that take all of our thinking to solve. Folks aging in the system is definitely something that we at People Incorporated see every day. Individuals that are starting to have maybe more physical health challenges or mobility challenges. What does the system need to pivot to make sure that we're adjusting to them? Things as small as most of the homes that we have for folks that are getting community residential services have stairs. What if you can't do stairs? Individuals, as they age, have more comorbid conditions, blood pressure, COPD, diabetes, etc. How do we create systems that can support those things in not just a cursory way, but a real way as they move through the system and they grow older? This is very important, because oftentimes there's kind of a cliff between that independence and a far more restrictive setting. So we do need to talk about those things, and certainly we need to talk about how do we set up success for our loved ones, our community members that need a little bit more support, by taking the steps that you heard Assistant Commissioner Grumdahl say a couple minutes ago, which is we have to be planful, and we have to make sure that we're creating a pathway for individuals to find the resources that are necessary to help stimulate and support. They're looking at how do we make sure that the cliff does not become too close as caregivers and family members are not any longer able to take an active role in that support. I am really lucky to do the work that I do, and although it can be frustrating and sometimes feel a little overwhelming because there's such a need, when I sit here amongst my colleagues, I realize we've got a lot of the pieces. It's really a process of us trying to figure out how do we innovate solutions that actually bridge the gaps by connecting the pieces in that continuum that we heard spoken about earlier. And I am firmly convinced that we can do that, and we can create a better, more sustainable system in the meantime, and that it is going to be extraordinary care for our most vulnerable citizens, but it's going to take all of our best gray matter. Thank you.
Thank you, and I am swimming with questions. But before we get to those, because Eric referenced Mindy Greiling and Fix What You Can, I thought just in case there are people in the room who don't know that Mindy Greiling is the author of a book called Fix What You Can, that we should, for the people on internet and in the room, make sure that they catch the reference to what Eric talked about. I'm going to begin by what I'm trying. There are lots of questions, and so I'm combining some, and even going to a trigger that was sent to me earlier. I think a group of you pulled some questions together. But the overriding question is this: what evaluation is used for currently available housing? And their example they used was one parent got involved with housing advocacy because the state was paying the home her son was in a huge amount of money, and her son wasn't being given his meds. The place was filthy, and her son was getting worse. It was difficult to find acceptable housing, let alone an ideal housing situation. The state knew this was a problem home, but nothing was being done. What oversight can be implemented so parents or guardians can be assured their adult child will have good care after they are no longer able to care for them? And I'll add from a couple of the questions. Here is, in these questions, they also come up with, well, they've had some ideas. As a parent, do we put housing stuff in a trust or will to protect our loved ones with disabilities? How can we protect our loved ones? That's always underwriting. And then, and maybe directing specifically to DHS, how will DHS better ensure quality necessary for stability when the financial incentives are often to provide the cheapest care in staffing, food, programming, etc.? So that's bringing a number of issues together, and I don't know if we start with Eric or Jill, or I'd like to be as flexible about this as possible with anyone jumping in and adding.
Well, thank you for those questions, and I definitely see the through line that connects them. I think that the answer is complicated, and it depends a lot on the circumstances that we don't have in that kind of aggregate picture of this question. It depends in part on what kind of setting that we're talking about and what the kind of regulatory oversight is for that particular kind of setting. It depends kind of how that individual is located there. Is there a public response that's kind of supporting ongoing services or residential supports in that setting? And so I think the challenge of those kinds of aggregate questions is sometimes that those details end up being really important in terms of guiding the path forward. In the event, I'm just going to speculate that in the event that this is a licensed setting and the individual that is in that setting is being supported through some kind of a Medicaid waiver, or other similar support, there are resources within the department where concerns can be raised, but there are often steps that can happen in the original agreement with that provider, or if the county has been involved in that placement with the county, that are often helpful prior steps. So in the event that those steps don't resolve the issue, there is a complaint line through DHS's SIRS unit that is able to receive those concerns, and I can throw out. I'll have to pull it up on the website, but I can throw out the contact information for that resource. I think that the challenge that's underneath it is a real one, which is the ability to have alternatives that are available for the individuals that are in those settings, and whether kind of the timeliness of being able to respond to those concerns as they happen. So I appreciate that this is for families, this is a critical moment to have a response, and the way that our system is structured right now is that there are steps and processes that have to occur before some of those solutions might be immediately apparent. that's part of why being able in your planning around long-term and sustainable options, being able to really understand who is going to be able to advocate for your loved one on an ongoing basis is critical, and that's just a reality of our current system as it exists. Is that we need we can't rely just on the quality of every provider, and we can't rely on systems that are really designed for more catastrophic interventions. There needs to be kind of the ongoing support, and that doesn't necessarily need to be family. It can be, but it can also be other support that is available to help make sure that the individual, your loved one, is getting the care that they need and that they've been promised in that particular location. So that's anyway a DHS perspective on that question. Jill, I don't know from a provider perspective if you have other things you'd want to add.
Jill.
Well, most simply, I just have to be honest with you. There's good CEOs and there's bad CEOs. There's good providers of care and there's bad providers. I mean, it just is what it is. I think the best thing that you can do is to not let go. If you feel that there's something that isn't right about the way that someone that you care about is being treated, you would do the same thing if you felt that their physical health care was being swept off. You would advocate for them getting that need met. There are ways to move that through the system and say, I don't believe what's happening here is appropriate, and really drive that. That is, we have to be the voice, and I know that that's hard and it's burdensome, but we have to be the voice. There is a system in Minnesota, well, there's a system everywhere, of really vulnerable adult reporting when people aren't getting medications, if they are being mistreated in some way or neglected. And obviously, as a provider, if something like that happens in my organization, it has to be reported immediately. Whether that person reporting it is the person that had the experience or the person that observed the experience or was part of it. The same thing is true with our clients. If our clients, for instance, in a case management relationship describe something with another provider, we have a duty to report those things. So there is a system where if there's neglect, if there's abuse, that of a vulnerable individual, that it does get raised up to quite a level, a full investigation is done, and a result is determined. The only way that can happen is if, in fact, the system is being followed and if the voices are being heard. I know that that's not the easy answer because it shouldn't happen to begin with. I get that. But unfortunately, there's a lot of providers of these kinds of services in the state of Minnesota. DHS is out frequently investigating our programs to make sure that we're following all of the rules and regulations that are set up for certification to do those services. And if there's something that's happening in between those times, that's how they need to know about it, is by raising the issue. As far as the question that was related to what do we do for an individual that is in fact moving through the system, and I am concerned that I might not be able to be that advocate, that guardian forever, or just that advocate forever. It is really, really important. I actually been working with a couple of individuals who basically kind of got panicky at COVID because of their age and said, we felt like we had a target on our back, and we were very concerned about our adult daughter who is living in a group home with persistent mental illness. And, they kind of panicked and just went out looking to see what was out there. they're now kind of pulling back, and they're talking to different agencies. They're talking to some legal counsel to talk about what are the things that we can do. Trust, I'm sure trust is an option. I'm sure you can certainly state your wishes in a will, but as it relates to supporting someone either through direct guardianship or advocacy, it is a legal process, and it is a process of telegraphing your wishes about how you want things to be handled if you're no longer the person that is able to do that. And I can't really speak to legal issues because, as my general counsel reminds me often, I'm not a lawyer. And but I will tell you there are folks out there that specialize in this area, and it is probably worth the hour that you would spend with them to say, this is my situation, this is what I'm trying to achieve, tell me where I should begin, because it is a legal process.
Eric, did you have something further to add?
I just so appreciate everything Jill just said, and I just want to amplify the point that she made, I think, so well about the experience that I think many of us have had when dealing with physical or somatic health care, that in addition to the person receiving the care, the patient, it is so critical to have the advocate that is in their corner and watching out and making sure that they're getting what they need, those needs are being met in a timely way. And so I think this is a place where perhaps we have a kind of parity between our behavioral health system and our physical health system, in that we really need to make sure, and part of that person-centered planning that families can be doing is to figure out what is the sustainable way to make sure that there is always somebody in your loved one's corner, regardless of whether that's family. Because I think the ability to have eyes on and to be vocal about what you see is a critical part of what helps our system improve and correct and make changes when it's needed. I don't think there's any substitute for that.
And just as another note, it doesn't make any of us happy when we know that someone is not getting their needs met because someone isn't doing their job. And I just can't say enough that it hurts the whole system when people are not being treated with respect and dignity and equity. So as much as, it is a hard and kind of an uphill battle, and it sometimes feels like you're, pushing a rock uphill, we can't stop having that voice, because it isn't just about our loved one, it's about the system.
And I'm going to combine a number of questions, and the next group is really about who can help us. Eric, the first one is, it's sort of a demonstration of what your first point. This is hard. And so the person says, how come I can find housing options for people with physical and developmental disabilities, but not for my son who has schizophrenia? That's kind of the start of a number of questions that deal with support staff, case managers, etc. And so I'm going to read 3 of them, and they have common themes, but it's how can money be spent? Does the budgeting include funds designation toward people resources and support, not just offset the cost of housing? In other words, does it have to go just to build houses, or can it go to supportive services? For example, housing specialists to help navigate resources available. Can some of the budget be allocated towards staffing departments who support navigating this complex system? Staff allocated to enforce standards and appropriate care, getting at some of the things we raised earlier. Case managers often have too many clients and get burnt out. Is funding an issue? Is training the issue? Is management the issue? You hear just a number of questions about how can money be spent. And yes, we have to build housing, but we also have to have support staff. We know, I hope I can say this safely, that the successful model is permanent supportive housing. It's permanent. There's supportive services. And that's a model that we all wish could happen. So just a range of ways in which how can money be spent, and I see Jennifer looking.
I'm going to jump in just quick, because I think this goes back to the idea that the vast majority of financing that comes through an agency like Minnesota Housing tells us to use it to prevent homelessness, build housing, pay for rent subsidies, do rehab projects to preserve housing, that most of the money that we get through government has that center on housing. It comes to the Housing Finance Agency. So a big part of what it's incumbent on us at Minnesota Housing to do in partnership with the Department of Human Services is figure out how do you pair the human services that somebody needs with the access to housing that's affordable. It doesn't come bundled, to agencies to do it, and we don't have the bundled authority to do it all. I would say probably the exception to that is around homelessness specifically, but nobody wants their child to become homeless to become eligible for some of these services in the first place. So, I really do think that it is about navigating multiple systems. It's income assistance and jobs, it's healthcare and behavioral healthcare, and the community supports that go along with that, and the housing system. So you have to, and everybody's situation is different in terms of how much of which of that's the issue. Some children, you may have purchased a home for them, or they may inherit your home, or the stable housing isn't as much as the supportive services. Other people, the housing itself is going to be the primary thing. Maybe they have eligibility for county case management or something like that, but they just haven't been able to get the housing side of it right. So every situation is different. I just want to acknowledge that. And also just what it is that a family is able to arrange for. I think, some of the economic pieces through trusts and some of the housing pieces are probably the more straightforward pieces to arrange for. It's the what if of somebody suddenly needing a higher level of support and that support not being there.
And I'll just throw out one more question around the idea of how can money be spent in case managers, et cetera. Are case managers required to do housing training to locate housing for individuals with disabilities? In other words, a question of both funding and training, I think. Eric.
So a lot to say here, and I think it goes back to, yes, it's hard, but you are not facing the difficulty alone. And so being able to recognize that there are organizations in every community across the state, like People Incorporated, that have people that spend their whole day, every day, figuring out how to solve these kinds of problems and piece together the resources that help an individual find, keep, and thrive in stable housing. Do we have enough of those resources? Probably not, no. But do we have resources that can be tapped and leveraged as you in your particular circumstance are trying to make sure that that right level of support exists? Yes. That alphabet soup that I talked about earlier that takes a long time to master, rather than mastering it, tapping into the organizations and the case managers and the professionals that have learned all of that stuff to figure out how to apply it to a lot of different situations is a faster path to get to that person-centered plan that is going to work really well in your specific situation based on what somebody's eligible for. I am happy to say that Minnesota has some resources along these lines that, again, are the envy of a lot of other states. We were the first state in the country to have a Medicaid-funded housing stabilization services benefit that is designed to help make sure when somebody's housing stability is threatened, there's a resource that can actually bring in a housing navigator to bear, help sort out what's needed to either stabilize this current arrangement or to transition to a new arrangement, help with the housing search, and use Medicaid funding to pay for that. That is a big deal. Is it everything? Is it enough? not in every case, but that's one of those examples of a resource that exists if you go through that pathway of trying to tap it. And again, hb101.org. Minnesota has the Housing Support Program, which used to be known as the Group Residential Housing Program. A very odd name, but the Housing Support Program allows individuals that are income eligible and have other bases of eligibility for that program be able to actually get access to community-based housing operating very much like a rent subsidy, and provides often support as well that's attached to that housing fund. And so those are remarkable resources that are complicated and tricky to navigate and involve working with a lot of different partners. And again, the starting point is finding, for your particular situation, that advocate, that person that can really help you navigate the complexity of that system and know what levers to pull in your particular situation. And again, hb101.org is a great place to begin on that journey.
Jill?
You know, I just want to quickly comment on a part of one of the questions that you talked about, which has to do with the way that the resources flow. We are in an unusual time in healthcare, period, around workforce. And we are in an unusual time right now, I think, post-COVID, if we can say that, that where we see just a tremendous unmet need, whether it be behavioral healthcare, housing, all of these things. The hill is high, and there's a lot of problems we have to solve along that hill. It is workforce and finding the workforce to be able to support the housing, the great housing programs and the dollars that we have here in Minnesota right now. It is the workforce to support the behavioral health care needs for the specific housing areas. I see those things as those bridges. If we don't figure out how to connect those, and I don't find a way to talk to Eric about what prevents me from opening up 3 more houses, what prevents me from being able to open up houses where I feel like I've got the stability and the continuity for clients, or talking to Jennifer and saying, yes, you know what, it would be awesome if we could find a way for some of those specialized dollars to help kind of support improvements in environments that are working with individuals who are aging in the system and need maybe more supports, handrails in the showers, or different things that are needed. We have to have those discussions. We absolutely have to have those discussions. I would be lying if I told you it didn't feel a little bit like playing whack-a-mole at the state fair every day. And I'm sure, I know my job, but I'm guessing everybody's job, because there's so many instabilities right now in our environment. But we just have to keep building those bridges, having those conversations. So tonight is a really amazing first step, because I've heard lots of things that I'm like, wow, I'm going to check back in with you too, and we're going to have some conversations, and I'm hoping they're hearing the same things from me. So, you know, we just have to keep pushing forward.
I think, Alice, if I can, I want to go back to what I said in my opening comments too, though. The same way in which we have a private market housing system with a bit of a public patchwork assist, we actually have a private sector healthcare system with a little bit of a public assist. And I think, Jill and I were just talking briefly before this started, the ability to privately pay for things that if you were really poor, you might get public assistance on, I think is something that the private side of the health and behavioral health care system hasn't given the attention to build. So it's kind of like, bad news, right? The default position on aging is that most people will die poorer, right? Well, I think we operate with the assumption that people with a severe disability, whether it's mental illness or something else, will become poor to be able to qualify for the public services. And I think what I heard in the background information for this is that the fact that the connection has remained between an adult child with a serious mental illness and a family, there are like means, and nobody wants to make their child homeless or poor or destitute to be eligible for these things. So I think there is a conversation about how do we build a private parallel to the public safety net version of a lot of this that exists. Because I think a lot of the things that we reference, it comes with the caveat of, well, if you're income eligible and you meet some of the other disability characteristics, but nobody is sitting there thinking, I want my child to be homeless and destitute so that they're eligible for a package of services. So I think that's part of the problem to be solved, and I think it's a challenge to, the broader way in which we finance healthcare and behavioral health in this country, and to Eric's earlier points, that mental health system has always been underfunded, undervalued, underpaid. I mean, all those things. And I think we can get into these conversations about, well, do some people with some disabilities do better than other people with other disabilities? I mean, but the truth of the matter is that we haven't built a strong healthcare system that's good at helping people who have additional challenges, even in the private pay side of the world.
Jill?
One of the things that you said that just actually, I think I'm going to steal it from you. The idea that we have a private system with a public patch, right? And the same thing is true for healthcare. That is the best sort of analogy that I've heard. And that is exactly what drives the issues around equity. It's exactly what drives the issues around equity. That somehow, because I'm part of the public assist, that I don't get to the front of the line, that I have to look at becoming poor before I can benefit. These are very deep philosophical issues that have very different resolutions. But it was, really just a great way to put it. And that is absolutely what drives the equity issues in housing, as well as a lot of different aspects of care.
And panel, I'm going to throw out a couple of them that I think have a very quick, almost a yes or no answer. We have a hard stop at 8, and I had one concluding question. One question is, does every county have the same housing funding? And I would say, Commissioner, that's a hard no. Not even close.
That's a hard no, not even close. The legislature did create a local housing aid program that's going to be available to cities of a certain size and counties. Funded here in the metro area through the increase to the metro sales tax. Part of that is going to go to local housing aid. So we'll be working with cities and counties all across the state to help them understand different ways that they can invest that money. We don't define how they can use it, but we will have oversight for it. But it certainly, for some, especially for like some of the smaller rural counties, they're going to get like $80,000 a year. And everybody knows, that doesn't build an apartment, that doesn't build a house. And so thinking about how to amass that and leverage other things is going to be key with that. No, the answer is no.
The answer is no. I think this is no also. Transportation needs and housing go hand in hand. Can housing funding be applied toward transportation? I would assume that's a no?
No.
And then
the Department of Transportation and a whole transportation silo that takes care of that.
But then here's another approach to it. What are the tools? I happen to be a transit supporter, so these kind of jumped out at me. What are the tools to encourage supportive housing being centered closer to public transit more often?
We try to prioritize that when we're looking at projects. We know that especially for folks who aren't going to drive or aren't going to have cars, one of the things that we look at is the location going to be convenient in terms of accessing transportation or amenities. And so that goes into the way that we score projects for funding. We don't want to build supportive housing where it's impossible for people to get anyplace else.
We certainly prioritize that as well when we open up a new facility or look at a facility. And what we saw, honestly, in the particularly 2020, 2021, and 2022 was the tremendous need around transportation outside of the immediate metro for individuals that needed to source services but had no way to actually even get 50 miles or 70 miles. And so that is certainly an area robust opportunity.
And I'm going to just read this last one, which just touched my heart. In my neighborhood in Edina, there is a licensed group home housing for men. There is a lot of turnover, and most have mental health issues. This is considered transitional housing. How can we help neighbors be less afraid and more welcoming? I don't think the home's residents are able to fully enjoy living in our neighborhood. From Edina. Almost made me cry a little bit.
Can I speak to that, though, Alice?
I'm sorry.
Can
Oh,
I speak
absolutely.
To that? I mean, yeah, I mean, what a sweetheart, whoever
Yes.
put that question out there. I mean, I think Edina did its first state-subsidized affordable development in a long, long time, the Sound Down 76. And, you know, we were really excited to be able to make an investment. I think one of the things that's important about activating and understanding the power of voice is that so often, like, our politics tell us what we should do, and then our neighborhoods tell us what we shouldn't. And we see that in conversations about siting housing all the time, in citing these special settings all the time. And yet we know for people is that people recover and thrive the more natural the community that they live in is, and that when people get over their fear and they allow these communities to be there and they engage as neighbors, that they actually find out that they're people with stories and families and lives and interests and things like that too. Some of my favorite stories that I get to experience when I'm just out doing the go talk to people in communities work is when people who have fought communities in order to build something because it was the right thing to do can report after it opened about the wonderful relationships that spring up with the people that lived there before the new thing was built and the people who live in the new thing that was built. And I just think that's really about thinking about our advocacy and showing up at the community planning meetings, showing up when a project's being cited, and showing up and saying yes. You know, the traditional phrase is not in my backyard, but there's a whole new movement, yes, in my backyard, EMB.
Thank you. Oh, I'm sorry.
Just real quickly, I think, you know, we have to work very hard, and it goes both ways. Whoever has the house has to really be looking to make sure that they're a part of the community too, that they're out there, you know, at National Night Out, and they're doing those things in the community, walking and meeting the neighbors and all of those things. And we work really hard at that. So it's a two-way street, and I would just encourage you, next time there's a neighborhood sort of thing going on for the individual who wrote that, think about how do we engage them to want to feel like they're more a part of it, because a lot of times people don't know any better, and they kind of walk around the house, right? They kind of walk around the driveway because they don't know what they're supposed to do. But the fact of the matter is we're in the communities for a reason.
Thank you to our panelists. We could have easily had another hour for questions that are here. And what I'm going to suggest to the planners is we're going to give all these questions to the planners to say, is there another way we could shape another evening structured around what we know is on the minds of people here? And I don't even know. I suppose, hopefully we monitored the chat room too. Okay, hopefully. And so to the organizers of this evening, is there a final comment, Mindy, or others that you just need to maybe to close it out? We have a hard stop at 8, but just in case.
Could we?
There it is.
Okay. Thank you very much. I would like to know, and related to Alice's last suggestion, how can families be involved? We often feel pushed away with the person-centered care. I was glad to hear Eric say families should be involved in person-centered care, but that's a conundrum when you're dealing with family members with serious mental illnesses. And thank you, Eric, for using the word discrimination. I think we all heard that from the panelists, and we all know that really well, so that's why we'd like to be involved further. Thank you.
And that might be another place to start. So I think we made the hard stop at 8 o'clock. Thank you for being here. Thank you to the participants.
Thank you very much. It's great.
Thank you all very much.
Thanks for all your work.